All right, everybody, welcome back into another episode of Stadium Seat Sports. As always, I'm Coop here with my partner and co-host Kriv. And in this video, we're going to jump into the second round of the 12-team college football playoff. So, Kriv, I'll throw it over to you to get us started right away. And we'll start with the game here on New Year's Eve. And that's going to be the Fiesta Bowl. We have Penn State taking on Boise State here. And I think this is an interesting matchup. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts because Penn State obviously dismantled SMU in the first round. And now we got a group of 5 team going against this Penn State team. And a lot of people are kind of counting Boise State out without the game even kicking off yet. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think one, of course, this you can argue it's very similar to the SMU game as far as caliber of opponent goes. The biggest difference, of course, being Boise State has Ashton Jeanty.
Mhm.
I don't want to get into it, but I think he should have won the Heisman.
Yeah,
But
I'm in agreement with you on
I'll
that.
say this: Penn State, even in the loss to Oregon, has started to look very good.
Mhm.
Offensively, they're clicking. Aller's been great. Obviously, I think losing their backup quarterback, what's his name? Is it Bo
Um,
Caligula or something? I probably butchered that.
Prabula, I think it's
Yeah,
Prabula,
something
I
like
think, or
that.
something like that,
Yeah,
something along
completely
those lines.
butchered it.
He's at Mizzou now, right? Is that where he's signed?
I believe so, but
Yeah.
really that extra added element of a running quarterback that they used him all year. His timing was kind of odd, but that's an element in some of these playoff games and in pressure situations. Having something like that can come in handy. So that could
Mhm.
potentially hurt them losing him. And of course, now if Aller goes down, it's bad news. So
Right.
hopefully it doesn't come to that, obviously. But I just wanted to put that out there as something to keep an eye on. But as far as this matchup head to head goes, I think Boise State's one shot just so happens to be their strength, and that is
Mhm.
Ashton Jeanty. Looking back at some of the close games, the losses, Penn State was susceptible to giving up big runs, a lot of running
Yep.
yards. In that overtime win, I think it was overtime win against USC,
Mhm.
uh, they gave up nearly 200 yards rushing that game. Ohio State, same thing. I think
Yeah.
maybe it
I mean,
wasn't
they went on
200.
a sustained like 5 minute drive, mainly running the ball to ice the game in that
Exactly.
game.
And believe me, I'm not saying Boise State has the people up front, but if USC could do it, then maybe
Sure.
Boise State can. I mean, Boise State obviously blocked well enough for Genty
Well,
to
even look at
be,
Ohio State with their makeshift offensive lines, right? Like, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
eh, they've
I mean,
not
that
been super strong up front all year with how many injuries they've had.
to be fair, that line they had against Penn State still had McLaughlin out there. So it
Sure.
was a
They were just
little,
missing Simmons. Yeah. It
yeah,
was just
yes.
Simmons.
So it
Yeah.
was slightly different there. Oregon, the game against Oregon, same thing. I think they gave up close to 200 yards again in that game.
Mhm.
So really, it's going to come down to Penn State's going to focus on stopping the run. So can Boise State still run the ball in those situations?
Yeah.
If they can, that's going to be very very bad for Penn State.
Mhm.
But it's a lot easier to put 9 guys in the box, 8 guys in the box every single play and ask Madsen to make a play. And I think Madsen's been very solid for Boise State,
Sure.
but he's not very dynamic. He's
No.
exactly what you kind of expect at a Boise State
Yeah.
as
And
far as
he's
like a
not the
quarterback
strength of that
goes.
team.
No, and he's been very complimentary for the team. He's done what he's had to do. Maybe he has some big throws in him though. I mean, he's going to have to take some chances.
Yeah.
They're going to dare them to throw the ball. But yeah, I think that really, without getting too much in the weeds on this, Boise State's obviously a big underdog for a reason. Penn State has way more talent, but they do have a path to it. But if Penn State can stop the run, then Boise State doesn't have much of a chance.
Yeah. And look, I'm not going to go too in detail with my, analysis because I agree with a lot of what you said. And correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't hear you take a pick. I'm assuming you're taking Penn State in this game.
I'm going to take Penn State.
Okay.
I think Boise State's a great story, but I mean, Penn State, we talked about before. I mean, this is a great break for them, how the bracket worked
Yeah,
out.
for sure. I look, I think most people, when looking at this Boise State team, not just the Boise State Penn State matchup, but just this Boise State team in general, knows that they go as far as Ashton Jeanty carries them. And Ashton Jeanty is an absolutely unbelievable player. I'm in agreement with you. I think Travis Hunter is an amazing player, but I think Ashton Jeanty would have been my number one on the Heisman ballot if I had to say, and if you had to say, it seems the same way. That Penn State defensive front can be very formidable. So if a angry, aggressive Penn State defensive front shows up and makes it difficult for Jeanty, and they make Boise State one-dimensional, and Jeanty is their best player. No disrespect to Boise State's quarterback. Like you mentioned, he's had some moments. He is not the strength of that team. So if that happens, I think Boise State can be in for a long game here. On the flip side, in that SMU game, I think a lot of people would have looked at the final score and think that Penn State just dominated them from like an offensive perspective. They had 2 pick sixes in that game. Their defense balled out in that game. Aller, Singleton, and that offense, they weren't stagnant. It wasn't like they were, some horrific offense, but it wasn't like they were just moving up and down the field on SMU with ease. Like SMU's defense did do some things in that game that I think if you're Boise State, you can take away from that and try to kind of put the same thing into action against Penn State in this game on New Year's Eve rather. And if Jeanty is able to run the ball effectively, and Penn State doesn't have a quick strike offense like we expect with an Andy Kotelnicki run offense, that we've seen it at times at Penn State this year. West Virginia, early on in the year, we saw some downfield throws, some quick strikes that we kind of expected Andy Kotelnicki to bring to this Penn State team. But at other times, we've seen them kind of revert back to that old school Penn State style of offense, which is just very stagnant and, is really antiquated in terms of like the new age of college football. So if Boise State can run the ball effectively and can tick time off the clock, and Penn State can't strike quickly on offense, then I think this game becomes a lot more interesting. And that is how I think Boise State wins the game. How I think Penn State wins the game is that defense continues to show up. The defensive line is the defensive line that shows up that we know they're capable of being, that kind of nasty defensive front that we expect year in and year out from Penn State. We see Drew Aller continue to make progressions down the field, especially in the mid-range and long ball, and then Singleton and Katron Allen just continue to be the workhorses that they've been really much of this year, but especially like you mentioned, since the Big Ten championship against Oregon, last week against SMU, they had some really nice runs as well. So I think the game is closer than the spread indicates in my eyes. And maybe that's just wishful thinking because we had so many blowouts in the first round of this 12-team playoff. But I'm going to go with Penn State as the pick here. I do agree with you. I think they just have too much talent. But I think we've kind of laid out a way in which Boise State could find themselves, kind of shocking the world and beating Penn State. And that sounds odd because Boise State is a higher rank than Penn State. But, when people are looking at these two teams, I think everyone's rightfully so kind of leaning Penn State just based on the pure talent and what we saw them do last week against SMU. So I'm with you. I'm rolling Penn State this game.
Yeah, I think that's the right choice. And I think the next game kind of has some similar parallels in the sense that it's another ultra talented team against another unexpected team. Now, of course, they're not a small conference team like Boise State, but I'll let you kick things off here with Texas versus Arizona State here in the Peach Bowl.
Yeah, this is an interesting matchup to me, right? Because I think people are looking at this game and thinking Texas is just going to come in with Quinn Ewers and that defense that the Texas Longhorns have. Steve Sarkisian's running a great program and team down there in Austin, and think that they're just going to blow the doors off of Arizona State. I've already mentioned it before. Cam Scatabo, Arizona State's running back, is one of my favorite running backs. Aside from Ashton Jeanty, he's probably my second favorite running back in all of college football. I think the guy's an absolute wrecking ball. And I think that if you let him get going, that opens up the field for this Arizona State offense, and they can strike very, very quickly. And Kenny Dillingham, he is to me one of the better coaches that we have in college football. I think what he's done at Arizona State this year, and not just this year, I think what he's done in general in his career at the collegiate level is nothing to be looked over or glossed over. I think he's a phenomenal coach. I think that Arizona State is kind of one of those sneaky teams. And if I'm ultimately looking at like one of these teams, because I think in this round of matchups, I think we would both be in agreement. There's two games that seem lopsided, and it's the first two we're talking about: Boise State, Penn State, and Arizona State, Texas. I think the other two games we're going to talk about, we could see either any of those teams winning that game, and we think those are going to be much closer affairs. We could be wrong about that, but I think that's how we would perceive them and how much of the betting public would perceive it as well. To me, I think Arizona State is more likely to upset Texas to me than Boise State is to upset Penn State. And that's no disrespect to Texas, but I think we've seen a different variation from times of Quinn Ewers. We don't exactly know which form of Quinn Ewers we're going to get on a week-to-week basis, game-to-game basis. We know the skill level that he has, but at the same point in time, he's been injured this year. He's had an inability to be kind of a dual threat quarterback, and he's made some questionable throws and has gotten, he's gotten out of these games in a lot of them victorious, but his inability to be a dual threat quarterback at times has haunted him, where defensive fronts for the opposing team have been able to kind of push that Texas defensive line around. Both losses against Georgia is what I'm referencing here. The Georgia defensive line ate in both of those games. And I'm not talking Arizona State's got Georgia's defensive line.
They do not.
But I think that is the key for them, is trying to get pressure on Quinn Ewers and trying to force him out of the pocket and make moves with his legs, which I think, again, he's got the capabilities to do so, or the skill set to do so rather, but is he capable of doing so is kind of more of the question at this point, right? I think that's the kind of key for them, because if he is forced into trying to be a dual threat quarterback and he's got some nagging injuries still, or he's just, hesitant to do so, then I think that Arizona State can have some success here, because that also means that Quinn Ewers can't just sit back in the pocket and pick you apart, because we know how capable he is of doing so. If he's got time in the pocket, he's going to find those nasty wide receivers on the outside, and Arizona State is going to be in for a long day. So to me, it's getting Cam Skattebo going for Arizona State. Kenny Dillingham is absolutely an X factor, and I think that he will absolutely show up. I think both him and Skattebo will show up. So I feel pretty good about that aspect for the Arizona State Sun Devils here. The biggest question for me is what Arizona State's defense can do. Can they slow down this Texas offense? Because the Texas defense is very good. So I think the Texas defense does get some stops on Arizona State. And so it goes back to the Arizona State defense for me. Like, can they get the stops that are needed to keep them in this game and potentially pull an upset? With that being said, for me, I'm not gonna predict an upset here. I think this one's more likely than the Boise State Penn State. I just feel really, really good about the Texas Longhorns defense. And I think that Quinn Ewers, maybe we see a little bit of Arch Manning in this game. Who knows? I think that they do enough to beat Arizona State and get the winner of the game we'll talk about next, which is Ohio State and Oregon. I think that Texas is a little bit too talented, and I think Arizona State's going to be a little overmatched here.
Yeah, and I don't want to double dip here where you kind of touched on already, but just a few quick points. So one, I think the reason there is a seed of doubt, and there's the reason you probably think that Arizona State can do this, is not only because of Dillingham and Skattebo, but Texas, arguably their only ranked quality win was a week ago against Clemson. You look at their schedule. I mean, none of the teams they played are ranked. They had that before the SEC championship game. They went into College Station and won 17-7 against Texas A&M. That A&M team just lost to a bad USC team where half the teams transferred out. So I try to look at Texas's schedule to try to see impressive wins, and it's hard to find. And Clemson, I mean, they had to make a 55-yard field goal to just have the chance to play Texas. And they got that down to one score in the fourth quarter. So
that was our closest game in the first round.
Yeah, so that gives me some pause. I do think that this is another similar matchup. Penn State, as Penn State, Boise State, supremely talented. if Scatterbo can get going, if Levitt can get things going to Jordan Tyson, he's a dynamic receiver. But Texas does have a top pass defense. I think they're in the top three. They might even be top one on
Mhm.
pass defense. They're number 10, I believe, in rush defense.
Yeah.
But
The
then you look at
defense is nasty.
yeah, but then you look at who they played, and it's like, okay, well, I don't know anymore. So, but yeah, I agree. I don't want to harp on it too much, but don't be surprised, as you mentioned, if Arizona State gives Texas a little more than they expected.
Yeah.
I think Dillingham's gonna go all out. He's a fiery guy, and he's gonna leave it all on the table. So,
Yeah. And
um,
I think this spread is the biggest of all of these games, which
yeah,
surprises me. I would
yeah,
have thought it would have been Boise State, Penn State, but this is the biggest spread we have in
13 and
all
a
four of these
half.
matchups.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Which
that's a lot.
surprises me.
It's a lot of points, but I mean, I think Texas is such an unknown. I'm too afraid to touch it. So.
Yeah. That's
Um,
fair.
all right. Well, we got our next game here: Ohio State, Oregon.
Yeah.
The
It's
the
granddaddy of them all,
rematch
man.
at the granddaddy of them all. The rematch. I think a lot of people. I mean, that first game was an instant classic, a 1 point win. Will Howard was a 1 second slide earlier away from a potential game-winning field goal. I mean, maybe Jaden
Yep.
Fielding. God knows what would have happened if he hit that. But if he hit that field goal, he might have hit
Right.
more field goals against Michigan. But
Right. That's true.
if
Get
you
his
don't mind,
confidence up.
I'll kick things off on
Yeah,
this.
no,
But
take this one. Yeah.
yeah, so the rematch thing to me is a very strong undercurrent in favor of Ohio State here.
Hmm. I agree with
And
that.
I think we saw it last week or a little over a week ago when Ohio State played Tennessee. They played with a chip on their shoulder, and they're a different team when they have that edge. And for
Sure.
whatever reason, them finding that edge is very difficult a lot of the
Hmm.
times. They lose it every year against Michigan. They lose it in big games early in the year, like they did against Oregon. I mean, I know they played well, but they had an opportunity to seize the moment and they didn't. And I think getting a rematch is just a extra chip that they needed to keep that momentum going. It's
Sure.
easy to play that Tennessee game and feel good about yourself again and say, hey, we were the most dominant team in round one. We put people on notice. Now you're playing the team that beat you. So
Hmm.
right back to focus. They're very familiar with each other. They played a hard fought 4 quarter game down to the very last second against this team. Uh, they don't want to see that team celebrate in front of them again. And that opportunity is right there for them to seize it. Um, We'll see how that makeshift O line holds up. I really liked Luke Montgomery coming in, rotating. I can't believe the rotation worked, but it kept
Yeah, we
every
had skepticism about that, but
yeah,
it
it
worked.
it did
It worked.
work. It probably kept them fresh.
Hmm.
And Montgomery was just plowing people over. So that's something that interior hasn't had. So for me, it's a few things. I I think Travion Henderson is going to be the engine that goes. I think we saw
Yeah.
it um,
He was running with
against.
like a man with his hair on fire in that round one matchup.
Yeah, and I think Judkins is very good, but Henderson, even the last couple games, has looked like the better back. Um, and he's so explosive. So I think them being able to run the ball with him will be key. They have to make a point of getting that ball into Jeremiah Smith's hands. They did a great
Hmm.
job against Tennessee to do that, not only just for throwing it up to him make a
Yep.
play, and he does it, but also there was reverses, even Ibuka, same thing, quick little passes to the flat, screens. They did screen passes to Henderson, which
Hmm.
for whatever reason they hadn't done, and he just completely destroyed.
I mean, they hit Henderson on a beautiful, like, what, 20-yard wheel route. It was
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah,
Like, that was a gorgeous play call.
when they yeah, and Chip Kelly and Ryan Day had the right play calls, and I'm really hoping that aggressiveness stays there. They have a formula that's very hard to defend when you keep a team
Hmm.
off balance, and they have enough players on offense to keep you off balance all game. And Chip
Yeah.
Kelly had Tennessee guessing all game. If he can get into that space again against Oregon, even with that great defensive line, they have Matayo. You say his last name?
Yeah. Uyunglele.
Yeah, I'm never going to try to say that. So he's been a beast. I think he has over 10 sacks. They have the transfer from Michigan State. in the center there. I'm drawing a blank on his name as well. But they are very stout up front. They have a
Hmm.
great pass rush. Um, Ohio State has to come ready. They have to do
Yep.
things to negate that pass rush. They have to have quick passes, screens, whatever. They have to go back into that mindset, and I think they will.
Hmm.
And then honestly, defensively, uh, it's going to come down to that Ohio State secondary. They can. I like what I've seen from them. How they've changed up their pass rush. I thought JTT and Jack Sawyer balled out last week.
Yeah.
They've ever since Nick Saban called them an antiquated defense, um, they've changed up the scheme and they've been way more effective. So that part I'm not as worried about. Um, and I think the linebackers have grown a lot. Sonny Styles, I mean, he jacked up that running back on Tennessee. I mean,
Hmm.
they can at least slow down the run a little bit for Oregon. But it's Davis Igbinosun and Denzel Burke against those receivers, Tez Johnson, um, Stewart.
Evan Stewart. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they got destroyed last time,
Hmm.
and it's put up or shut up time for both those guys, both highly rated guys, and that game has to be just etched in their memory. And this is your chance to redeem yourself. And if they can
Yep.
step up and change things, I think if they play just a normal game for them, Ohio State should win this game.
Hmm.
But the question is, can they?
Yeah. It's which Ohio State's going to show up. That's the biggest question. Which
Yeah,
one are we getting?
exactly. And I think they're going to use Caleb Downs differently in this game than they did last time. They've done a lot of more three safety looks with Jordan Hancock and Lathan Ransom. So I think that's a new little wrinkle they have that might actually help them in these situations. And then one last thing, keep an eye on. Don't be surprised if Jermaine Matthews plays a lot in this game.
Hmm.
Um, Burke and Igbinosun might not have the speed for Tez Johnson, but Jermaine Matthews does.
Yeah.
Um, he's essentially the third starter for those corners. He rotates in, but and for whatever reason, he barely played against Oregon the first time. So sorry, but yeah, with that being said, I think Ohio State's going to win. I do. I think it's going to be very close. Dylan Gabriel, that guy, things break down around him, and he just always makes a play.
Hmm.
Uh, but I think it's going to happen where it's going to break down, and he's going to have a key turnover in this game. And he hasn't made those mistakes in those big games, but I think it's coming.
Yeah.
And I think that might end up being the difference maker.
Yeah. No, it was a great analysis by you, I think, in looking, kind of a deep dive at this game. I'm going to bring up a few things that I don't think you touched on. And if you do, or if you did
Yeah,
rather, apologize for double dipping here. Number one, I think that you and I would both be in agreement. The Tennessee Volunteers are an athletic, fast team. They looked slow against Ohio State. Ohio State looked like they were on just a different level against that team. Do
yeah,
we agree? Like the way that TreVeyon Henderson got from the first level to the second level to the third level before the Tennessee Volunteer defense even realized what was going, like they looked different. And that is not a slow, unathletic Tennessee Volunteer team.
the
So
the
like
way
that's the team you saw. That might be the best team in college football.
yeah the way they looked was what they were hyped up to be in the offseason. And
Mm-hmm.
it took until game 14, 15, whatever,
Yeah.
13. But that was an incredible team. And the
Yeah.
question is, can it be repeated?
Yeah. Next thing I didn't hear you mention, and this is he was not there in the first game. This is a big thing. Jordan Birch on
Yes,
that Oregon
yes.
defensive line will be playing in this game. That's a big thing for me because the Ohio State offensive line is a question mark. They played really well against Tennessee. You already talked about Mateo Uiagalelei.
Yep.
Jordan Birch will be there, and he is a game wrecker. So that's something to keep an eye on. You touched on it, the Ohio State defense. I heard this during the Tennessee game because I didn't know this. That Ohio State defense has not given up a passing touchdown since the Oregon game. That's
Yeah.
unbelievable. They've not given up a passing touchdown since the Oregon game. And Ryan Day and Jim Knowles reshuffled and altered their defense after that game. You heard them talk about it in the press conference. So let's see what this Ohio State defense does against an incredibly talented Oregon team. Dillon Gabriel at quarterback, Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, those guys are incredible. Of anybody that could hold a candle to Ohio State's offensive weapons, it's this Oregon Ducks team. So that's very interesting to me. And so that's something to watch. You already kind of touched on that. Will Howard looked unbelievable against Tennessee. Which version of Will Howard do we get? The version we got of Will Howard in the first Oregon game was a great version. Yes, he slid a second too late.
Yeah, he was fine.
Will Howard had over 300 yards in that game. The only other game he had 300 plus yards passing, this Tennessee game a week and a half ago. So that's something to watch here. I think we're going to have another instant classic. I think it could come down to the same thing. Who has the ball last? Essentially what it came down to in the first game, except Ohio State ran out of time. I'm leaning towards Ohio State in this game. I'm going to pick them. I think it's -2.5 is the spread right now. So I'm going to pick them in this game straight up to win. I think it's hard to beat a really good team twice, which is what Oregon would be looking to do. I also think Ohio State needs to strike fast and quickly. They just played a week and a half ago. The Oregon Ducks have been off for what, 3 weeks, almost 3.5 weeks here. There could be a little bit of rust. I don't think Dan Lanning is going to let them be too rusty, but I think Ohio State has an opportunity to strike and get up early and take it from there and try to just withstand the punches that this Oregon Ducks team is going to throw at them. So I'm going to lean Ohio State. I'm taking Ohio State in this game. I think we're going to have another instant classic. Many could argue this could be the two best teams in college football, and this might be the de facto national championship game here. So I think we're in for a great game. Guys, we're going to go very quickly here through this last game. We're running out of time here, and that's going to be Georgia and Notre Dame. So I'll give you my quick analysis and pick, and then I'll throw it over to you. This is a really interesting game to me because we already know Carson Beck is out. He's done for the season. We have Gunnar Stockton coming in. Gunnar Stockton was one of the best quarterbacks in the state of Georgia. He's a dual threat quarterback. I think he's more comfortable with his legs than he is with his arm at this point in time. So if I'm Notre Dame, and they have a nasty, nasty defense that the Notre Dame Fighting Irish do, if I'm them, I am making him beat me with his arm. I think he's got the skill level and skill set to be a great passer, but I think he's more comfortable, especially given the lack of games he's played, being able to scramble and get himself out of trouble versus like throwing the ball away or fitting it in a tight pocket. So that would be my game plan if I'm the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And for them, they're very physical up front, both on the defensive line and offensive line. Speaking of Notre Dame, Riley Leonard, we know how great of a running quarterback he is. We know how great their backfield is in terms of their running back depth. I think that they are going to try and run it down Georgia's throat here. And for Georgia on the defensive side, make Riley Leonard beat you with his arm. Kind of a similar situation with Gunnar Stockton. Like Riley Leonard's very comfortable running the ball. He's a great dual threat quarterback. Make him beat you with his arm. Same thing with Gunnar Stockton on the Georgia side. Make him prove it and beat you with his arm. I think Gunnar Stockton being in this game, similar to the Cardale Jones situation with Ohio State years and years back in the initial 14 college football playoff, is a little bit of an advantage for the Georgia Bulldogs because Notre Dame doesn't have nearly as much film to prep on Gunnar Stockton as they would have had for Carson Beck. So I think that that's a potential wrinkle for the Notre Dame team. But I do think that Marcus Freeman has them super locked in. I think that defense travels well. I think the defense is flying around. They're hitting hard. They're playing really aggressive and angry. And I just trust Riley Leonard at this point in time in their collegiate careers more than I do Gunnar Stockton. So I'm going to take the Notre Dame Fighting Irish to win this game in a very close battle. I think this, along with the Ohio State-Oregon game, are going to be our two closest games, but I'm going to take Notre Dame to win outright.
Yeah, and I think you made a lot of good points there. And I'm actually leaning towards the same, surprisingly, which is crazy because I'm picking Notre Dame to win a playoff game, let alone a playoff game against the SEC team.
Sure. And this is a different beast than the Indiana Hoosiers. So,
Yeah, yes, it is. And I'll say the one thing that concerns me the most is that Riley Mills is out for Notre Dame.
I forgot about that. That's big.
That's a huge loss for them.
Yeah.
They do have other good players on that line along that can not fill in, but they are stout on that line. It's not a one person kind of thing, but
sure,
that could be devastating potentially. I do think Riley Leonard's running ability
Mhm.
and Jeremiah Love's running ability. They are a, this is going to sound kind of funny. They're a more high level talent version of Georgia Tech in a sense on
Sure.
offense.
No, I think that's a
Um,
great comparison.
Haynes King, he ran for at least 100 yards against them. They had another, I forget who their other running back was, ran for almost 100 yards.
Hmm.
Leonard and Love are better in most regards.
Yeah.
No
And I would say the
disrespect.
Notre Dame offensive line is much better than the Georgia Tech offensive line overall.
Yeah. So
Right. So,
just the idea of that, even if Notre Dame is missing Riley Mills, they could potentially own that line of scrimmage still, especially on offense, and just run it down their throat. And
mhm.
that's crazy to say with Georgia, but they haven't. This is not the same Georgia defense you think of. It's easy to
Right.
fall into that trap. So, um, without going into too much more, because you hit on a lot of good points there, I think that's what's going to be the difference maker. It's going to be
Hmm.
Riley Leonard running the ball, Love running the ball.
Hmm.
They're gonna force Georgia to stop that, and if they sell out, then who knows? But
That could open up the passing field, you know?
yeah, yeah. So we'll see what happens. But I think once again, I'm with you on this one. Notre Dame, close one, but I think that run game's going to seal the deal.
Yeah. And guys, apologies that we had to kind of, hurry through the last game, kind of hitting the time limit here. But as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in, listening to, any of our podcasts here. It's always much appreciated. Drop a like, a subscription below, leave us your thoughts on these games. We can't wait to watch them. And, happy holidays to everybody. Hope your
Yep.
guys' holiday season's been going great. And we'll see you guys on the next video.
Yeah. Happy New Year.